Just before we get to introductions, I wanted to put this session in some context. So if you think back, March, which seems like a long time ago, I think the last time I travelled was the day before my birthday on March the 11th, when things were starting to develop. And I think we were all facing into 2020 as a year, just like any other year, really, focusing on growth, performance, improvement, cost management, whatever the business was trying to do, operations running smoothly, and digital transformation programs and ambitions being addressed through numerous change projects and programs. And then seemingly overnight, that happened, as my teenage daughters want to say when they have something clumsy, and businesses needed to move quickly into remote home working, and then that was quickly followed by closing premises, factories, warehouses, offices, stores, and then as the government imposed extra lockdown and social distancing, that became more of a stark reality for a lot of people, and people realised that it was going to be something we were going to be living with for at least weeks, if not months, as we've now experienced. The next step on that journey generally was resolving connectivity challenges, access issues, and making sure that where you could run a business virtually, that those business processes and the systems could be operated remotely. So, we had customers that had physical contact centres, and then they would. Harriet, you've got an echo on the line there. Sorry.
I will mute myself.
Is that all right? Just so I can hear myself playing back. It's not the most pleasant of sounds. So centres moved from physical call centres distributed virtually, and a lot of companies found out the hard way that they didn't have easy access to corporate systems when people were outside the office, and they needed to work through that. Plus, number of clients that I spoke, shortage of laptops, having to rush out equipment to people in homes, etc. And home broadbands creaked a bit, and we may well, as we were joking earlier about bandwidth and people streaming within families locked down in houses. But quickly, organisations moved through those steps 2, 3 and 4, and probably are in that loop somewhere where organisations need to ensure that those processes, sometimes with constrained capacity, could still operate with the right levels of control and efficiency. Now, I think in certain instances, particularly again, come back to that customer service and customer call centre side of things, then a lot of people are working on compromised customer service levels. They've got fewer resources, the wait times are longer, that may not be able to offer all the services that they had traditionally done. But it's not to say, not everybody stopped activity. We're going to talk a little bit more about where different companies find themselves at the moment later in the sessions, but certainly for our sector in helping clients to implement change and digital transformation, then we've seen whole portfolios of change and improvement projects and transformation initiatives affected by this. So whilst we've certainly been carrying on fulfilling delivery commitments for clients that wanted to carry on with their projects. We had one team, I think a number of people actually attending now, actually did deliver a major program that had already been working remotely for some time. And that project went live at the beginning of April and has been in the sort of post-go live warranty period for a little while. But elsewhere, we've definitely seen go lives being delayed, projects have been stopped, decisions about commissioning new investments have been shelved, and some of those will be for an indefinite period of time. So whilst there's some of those projects were delivering tactical improvements, other projects would have been there to take the business forward to some future operating model. Now, the question is, does that future operating model that you were heading to before remain valid? And even if it does, will you be able to take the same route to get there that you were taking before? So where people are at now, 9 weeks on, with UK government and other governments relaxing those lockdown constraints to try and get the economy back up and running, people are focusing very much on this step 5, planning and delivering operational ramp up and moving their businesses forward towards some sort of better future. Now, I think it's important to stress that there are multiple journeys, or at least multiple stakeholders and multiple aspects to these journeys. There is very definitely the one around employees and workforce. The facilities question is there all the time. People are debating whether they need the same office infrastructure that they had before. Customers are going through a journey as well, and the response that an individual organisation needs to make is got to be running in tandem with what their customers need to be doing or are able to do. And then, of course, you've got the reliance of your own supply chain and your suppliers, and maybe even rethinking some of your products and services as you go through this. So each of those journeys, it's almost like there's a multi-lane highway running here, multiple vehicles on it, and everybody needing to move at slightly different speeds depending upon what you're addressing. So it's a complex situation, and it's fluid, and it's very easy in those circumstances to become almost like the rabbit in headlights bit. Now, we think there are some very straightforward questions. Now, they appear straightforward, but the response to them could be quite complex at the end of the day. Every organisation can ask to decide on the next best course of action that they've got to take. And these are the 5 questions we've got. So, where are you today, and where do you need to get to? What the options do you have? And then the question about what order do you tackle things in, and how do you balance the medium and the long term? Now, we recognise that deciding on the next course of action isn't just like go through this process once. There's going to be multiple loops around this process. So in order to keep your organisation moving forward to both the next step and the next step and the next step, then you need to go through this loop quickly, and you need to go through it multiple times. And I guess the other point is, and the reason why I've asked Harriet to join me on this one, is that it's not some sort of abstract business or organisation that's going to go through this journey. It's actually individuals and people. And alongside those, what appear to be straightforward questions, the answers to those questions or the decisions to be made are probably not as straightforward. And that means that we need to be able to equip organisations, need to be able to equip our staff and those expected to lead with the right resources and resourcefulness to take the organisation successfully along that journey. We need to help leaders to be able to effectively preserve their sanity in this session. And we're going to focus on the where questions in this session. Where do you need to get to? And where are we today? So I'm Bryan Oak. I'm a director of Searchlight, and I head up our consulting, strategy and architecture team. My background is a significant number of years in manufacturing and supply chain, first and foremost, and 26 years in this whole area of technology-enabled change and improvement. At Searchlight, we look to give independent advice and delivery work to our clients, and to help them define and deliver business improvements through technology-enabled change. Clients from across industry sectors come to us to help them design those journeys. They come to us for a second opinion. They come to us for expertise and skills in being able to get things delivered. And they also come to us to help them recover troubled programs. Now, the other part of this this talk or this webinar is going to be talking about the individual people and leadership side of things. So I'm really pleased to welcome Harriet Beveridge. She's a personal friend and professional colleague of mine. Harriet, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I hope the echo doesn't kick in. So I'm a leadership coach. So really simply, I'm here to help individuals and leadership teams have the resourcefulness, the courage to make it happen, basically. So I'm conscious of time, so I will hand straight back to you, Bryan.
Yes. And so yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of words that are being adopted in the press and in media, etc. A lot of those are already getting tired and overused. So we're going to try and avoid too many cliches in this. But if you want to play a bit of pandemic cliche bingo as you go along, feel free, and you can give us a score at the end of the session. So we're going to start at the end almost. So where do people need to get to? I think that we generally encourage organisations to think about that. focus where they want their improvements and where they want their outcomes. And so starting with where you want to be in the future, where you want or need to be next, is a good point. Yeah, and in both answering this question and the later one of where are you today, we're going to look at the organisational side of it, and then we're going to look at the people, individual side of it, the me side of it. So just talking about this from the organisation's perspective, then. I think an ex-boss of mine reminded me of the importance of having a destination and a route map defined. And he used a driving analogy at the time. So if you're going for a drive, Bryan, you don't just get in your car and drive. You decide where you need to get to, and then you follow a route to get there. He was only partially right, actually, because at the time, I have a newborn baby, frequently got in the car just to drive, to get her to go to sleep. I didn't really care, where I was going. The route wasn't that important, but the purpose of the journey was still defined, to get a peacefully sleeping baby. But you get the point from this. So it's obvious that nobody knows how this is really going to play out. We don't know what societal or business changes are actually going to stick. And I think that if you focus too hard on crystal ball gazing, if you're trying to look too far into the future, then it's just not going to be valuable at this point in time. And it was interesting because I'm looking for this image. I was looking for a royalty-free image of a crystal ball, and actually came up with an article in Forbes magazine, which this quote comes from. And I think if you read that, you see it, you sort of look at that and you think, well, surely that was written in the last few weeks, but actually that came from an article that was published back in October last year, before any of this kicked off. So it's difficult to predict the future, and indeed it's probably almost impossible to do that. So how do you go about looking at your future operating model, given where we are at the moment? Well, I think the point that we would like to focus on, or I would suggest, is that you're probably not focusing on some ultimate destination at this point in time. You're trying to define the next incarnation of what your business needs to look like. That future state might only be a few weeks away if you're going through this sort of immediate operational ramp-up phase, for instance, or it might be a couple of months out, rather than being a few years away. So with everybody having had their 2020 business plans thrown up in the air, now's the time to both tactically and strategically reflect and reset and reprioritize things. And the first consideration there is, if you look at your external factors, if you look at your internal state of health, what's the level of jeopardy that you're facing? And Harriet and I had a conversation about what's the definition of jeopardy, but danger of loss, harm, or failure. So ask yourself whether you've seen evidence that your business model is no longer valid. Yeah, have you seen the complete obliteration of the demand for your products and services, or have you seen an opportunity to create other products and services? Are your customers redefining their expectations of value and service? At the same time, your operating model. So one's your business model, your next is your operating model. Has the situation exposed or presented any opportunities around the way in which you deliver services, or the capabilities that you need in order to deliver those services? And then the final bit is just basic operations. Are there things that you need to address that will give you operational optimization, or more resilience, or more control in the short term? Or quite simply, is the level of jeopardy so great that actually this has exposed your business in terms of the levels of liquidity, access to cash, just to keep things afloat in the first place, following a collapse in sales? So commentators might be saying that things won't be the same when we come out the other side, but there's a big difference between not the same, everything has changed, and not the same, some things will be different. And I think you've got to critically assess that. You've got to look at what's driving those changes, and you've got to assess what's different from where you were heading before. I think, you know, we've heard examples of, we've got Hillary's Blinds near us. You know, they turn their manufacturing lines, and Burberry and other fashion producers offered their production facilities for producing PPE equipment, equipment. Or other people were rapidly designing and producing respirators. But you know, that's not going to be a long-term strategy for them. It's not going to be a massive shift in direction. But what it might have done is provide a useful demonstration that actually their facilities were way more flexible than they assumed they were, that their engineering teams and development teams were more innovative, and that the new product could actually be brought to market a damn sight quicker than usual. So what organisations might have done is demonstrate that they have more capabilities than they thought, and they might open up more possibilities and opportunities. Or it's exposed weaknesses. So you didn't have enough online presence to capitalise on the surge in home delivery, for instance, or perhaps you lost control of a key process. So, you know, really got to look at what's been the exposure, what's the longer term exposure, and what's the opportunity. And then come back to that point about remembering that there are different perspectives and there are different constituents in this, with the employees, your customers, your suppliers, etc. And so you're going to need to look across multiple tracks, multiple horizons, a strategic, a tactical, and an operational area, and look for what's needed to create the next reachable state, rather than position something as a relatively abstract future target. So as you go through this, whilst yes, you have to focus on your operational ramp up, you've got to be balancing that short, medium, long-term objectives and the ability to respond quickly to changing priorities. So if it's not sensible to paint, you know, an absolute vision of where you want it to get to, then maybe in a specific destination, maybe what you need to be doing is setting a general direction. So, you know, if we go that direction, then that should get us where we need to be, based on what we know today about the way our business is going to work and the operating model, and define a trajectory in terms of, you know, in the short term, we're going to need to do these things and produce these outcomes. We're going to come back to this point about business outcomes. You know, what is it? Is it cost reduction, cost containment, sales increase, throughput, customer footfall? What's going to help to demonstrate that progress is being made in this next period of time? And that point about it having business outcomes being very clear, it's probably more important than it has been previously. It's vital that, given the current circumstances where people might be prone to panic, they might get distracted by worries or setbacks, that you keep your teams, you and your teams, focused on some really good defined business outcomes. There's a quote here from Tony Robbins that, you know, so if you can focus people's attention on something, on specific things that you want, then that's where their effort and their energy will go. And then I think the other thing organisations need to not forget is that the framework of performance measures that they have, the targets that they set during that last round of annual appraisals or cascading of the budgets, well, it probably doesn't fit anymore. And people need to go back and realign their management systems and their reward systems so that they focus on the outcomes that they want now and give the motivation that's necessary for people to achieve what they need to do in the short term. So, you know, so when it comes to the other bit is about commissioning change projects. So I've spoken to quite a number of clients this past week just to understand where they're at and what they're feeling about everything. And a lot of them seem to have settled on 20% as a sort of a magic number in this. You know, if a project, when it comes to projects this time, if a project can reduce costs by 20% or increase throughput by 20% or sales by 20%, if you can deliver plus or minus 20% of something tangible in the year, then it's probably worth doing now. Otherwise, it's going to wait. So leaders are going to have to make some bold decisions here. And especially when it comes to doing anything beyond the immediate operational ramp-up activities. So I'm going to hand to Harriet to talk a bit more.
So all through this, you've got, warm-blooded human beings, as it were, driving all this. And it's always been the fun and games with change programs. I started off my career at Ernst & Young as a management consultant. So, I quickly specialised in the kind of people bit, as it were. So I'm fascinated by the individual in all this. And just as much as business models that have been thrown up in the air, people's sense of self, their confidence, their rhythms, their routines have all been thrown out of the window. I mean, it's become kind of quite normal to have, Zoom meetings where there's a kid wandering in the background, or, bird song in the background. That the kind of,
or people using ice machines.
People using ice machines.
Yes.
Okay. We have resurfacing the road here, but the kind of the personal bit, is thrown up in the air just as much as everything else. So as a leadership coach, what I'm noticing is I wanted to, with both of the kind of future and the now, give 3 quick tips really around things that you can do either for yourself, or as you're leading your team, or those of you who are in the consulting world and helping clients change their business model. So the first thing was around visualization. So you skip to the next slide, Brian. And I wrote a book called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster with an Olympic gold medalist called Ben Hunt Davis. I am not sporty remotely. My games teacher once said to me, "You waste energy with every step you take, Harriet," which is motivation 1980 style. And but what I was intrigued by was some of the strategies that Ben Hunt Davis and the rowing crew used that I could steal and use for my benefit and for my clients' benefit. And one of the techniques that he uses is visualization. So he talks about year after year just visualizing being on the podium and imagining what it would be like, and feeling the celebration, and also visualizing what that race would be, the final race. So he talks about actually when he was on the starting line at Sydney in 2000, there was an air of familiarity around it, because he'd visualized it so much. Now, I must confess, I was quite skeptical. I'm not a particularly visual person. I was always a bit like, I'm not sure this is for me. It seems a bit too woo-woo. But I think the penny dropped for me when I realized that actually we all imagine ourselves in the future. It's just that, do we do it in this context? So next slide. I bet we've all been on holiday before we've got on holiday, if that makes sense. That you might be sitting in an office and finishing off some work, but actually you're already spiraling, flying yourself forward to that holiday. You can kind of feel the sand between your toes. You can feel the water lapping, and that's all it is. That's all it is. It's just imagining what that future is. Or if you've ever designed anything, whether it's you've built your own house, or built a shed, or built a gateway, there's that kind of, you've got to mentally imagine it before you actually produce it. So the gauntlet that I'd lay down to you is, how much are you doing that for yourself right now? That we're often so busy focused on, oh my God, what am I doing with my business, or what can I do with my clients? What about the future me? And that might sound desperately cheesy, but our kids do it the whole time. We're constantly trying to encourage them to think about what when you're a grown up, and what about us? What's the kind of the future you that you need to visualize? So I'll give you some examples. I've got some clients and chief execs who've been used to a much more, I guess, to caricature, almost command and control type leadership style, that it's been much more predictable, and driving change programs being much more kind of linear in the approach. And suddenly they're having to be much more kind of tuned into people, and much more delegating, which is scary, and much more having to tune into the coal face over here and pivot quite quickly. Now that's a different future you, as it were. So just in the same way that Bryan was talking about, planning for new business models, I just wonder what that future you looks like. What are some of the ingredients that you'd like to dial up, and what does that look like? And the more that we kind of visualize it as a possibility, the more that they've done a lot of research around this, that we start to believe it, that the kind of neural circuitry kind of catches up with us. Now, if you're still thinking, I don't know what the destination is, how that's the whole point, then maybe it's around compass bearings, in the same way that Bryan was talking about what's your business trajectory. So on the next slide, the kind of sense of, even if I don't know where that exact destination is, what do I know my compass bearings are? So what needs to be important to me? right now? What is going to drive my decision making? So the reason the book I wrote was called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster is that, you know, everything for Ben was around boat speed. How could they get boat speed? So what's important to me right now, and therefore what do I need to do to drive that? You know, or what values? So we don't want to lose sight of. That we're not getting sucked into the panic or the crisis mode. So I was talking to a client recently about honesty, and they as a leadership team had always been really honest. And that was something that was quite tempting to kind of go, let's just, you know, like pretend we know what we're doing in the middle of the crisis. It's like, no, we're going to be honest with folks that we're not clear on what's going to happen, and this is what we're doing, and we're going to review it, and you know, and so on and so forth. And what motivates you to do a good job? And by that I mean, if you know what gives you energy and what makes you really show up, then that can be a compass bearing to make sure that that, you know, through any change program or change in the business model that you're trying to unleash, that you're tapping into that. So so yeah, keep the questions coming in. I'm noticing the chat, and I'll look at them as we go, and we'll come back to them at the end. But in terms of the kind of the future bit, as it were, yeah, it's that sort of that sense of what the end picture and the end and the compass bearing is, and in terms of tapping into the motivation, it's what might be the successes along the way, as it were. So, you know, because I think there's been a lot of beating ourselves up around, oh, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, and I should be doing it quicker. But where are we moving towards that? Back to Bryan.
Okay, thanks, Harriet. Thank you. So I think the important thing with all these things is that any journey that you take, it starts from, you know, where you are today, and for everybody, for every individual and every organisation, that's going to be a slightly different place. So in this bit, you know, we all need to take stock of where we find ourselves. We all need to reflect on how the business has been affected and how our customers and suppliers have been affected. And the operational risks and the problems and the opportunities that have been exposed. So, you know, the other point is really sort of, you know, how's your business been affected, and then how long before we're going to see any sort of recovery? So, yeah, and the answer to that is it's different. It's different in different sectors. It's different in different organisations. So even the journey to date, you know, supermarkets saw a huge surge in demand, which in turn flowed back through the supply chain. You know, one of my contacts works in a meat processing factory, and they were, you know, running at 150%. Their online channel, Sainsbury's online channel, for instance, you know, was pushing 200% plus, double the normal volumes that it normally does, and probably could have got more. The demand was there for it to go more, but they just didn't have enough delivery slots or vans to service that. Now, that seems to be settling down now, albeit it's settling down at a more elevated, steady state than pre-March. And it looks like that might sustain, and that, you know, more people will have made the shift to home deliveries. And we've also got, you know, we've got pharmaceuticals client. They're continuing to produce drugs. They're continuing to work within their existing forecasts and their budgets. And indeed, you know, their business was forecast to grow because they're releasing new products, new drugs to the market, and they're still carrying on with that. And then we've got, you know, other examples, social healthcare provider, for instance, that we work with, where they still got to provide their critical service. They provide residential care for adults with learning difficulties, and they still, you know, their business really, other than some lack of availability of some of their staff and social distancing and needing to equip themselves with PPE, etc. You know, their business side of things, it carries on. But then on the other side, you know, we've got, you know, seen non-essential retail, food on the go, fashion clients where their sales have been decimated, and particularly those where they're normally reliant on some summer seasonal sale as well. Absolutely decimated, closing stores, furloughing hundreds, if not thousands of staff, and emptying and switching off their supply chains, you know, overnight almost. And that obviously has a knock-on impact to suppliers. And if you've got a big ship and you've already stopped it, you know, it takes a little while to slow down, but it also takes a long time to get moving again. So I think we've got to bear those things in mind. And, you know, at the same time, we've got organisations, you know, we've got a couple of people who are working with AQA, the examinations board, now they've been a bit diverted because they've had to invent a completely new mechanism for awarding grades this year. And meanwhile, we were helping them go live with new finance and HR systems. So, organizations are all starting from different places and will experience the impacts of this over different durations, different times. The shape of that recovery curve, 3 examples that are shown here, a U, a V, and a W. McKinsey have suggested up to 9 different curves. Well, I suppose that's why they get paid the big bucks to come up with 9 rather than 3. And then, there's also the L curve where things never recover back to anything like what they were before. So I guess the key question is that point about recovery back to what, and we talked about that before. So when we are looking at this, we've got to be looking at recovery scenarios, and we've got to recognise that businesses aren't islands. Firstly, you've got customers that are willing, able, and need to buy things, and then you've got your supply chain that has to move along with you. So when you're modelling these scenarios or thinking about these scenarios, and the impact that they could have positively or negatively on revenues, costs, workforce, cash, budgets, whatever it might be, you've got to think about that from both point of view of how that relates to what your customers are going to expect and what your suppliers are capable of helping you with. And all of those things, are going to determine, what changes and improvements beyond just basic operational re-establishment of operations you can afford to go after now, and what things need to wait till later. So
Bryan, we've lost your audio. So I can't hear Bryan, which might be my problem, but if you could put in chat if everyone else has lost his audio as well. Oh, Bryan, you've gone, mate. Well, look, I tell you what, hand over to me. And I'm going to talk about the me bit of the current. We'll come back and back to Bryan in a minute. So the me bit that I was going to talk about the current is around. Oh, you're there. You're back.
I am back. Sorry,
right, go for it. Go for it.
I don't know why. That was.
And also, just a quick time check. They're about 4:35.
Okay. All right. So. Sorry about that. So, yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. And my laptop lost its Bluetooth connection. Can you hear me okay? Yep, all right, good. So yeah, I think the other thing at the moment is whether you're in a hand-to-mouth situation where worrying about how to fund that ramp-up process, or whether you're able to sort of step back a bit. And I know the farm-to-fork analogy isn't quite right, but I wanted something which means that you've got the ability to look at the bigger picture and look at the slightly longer term picture. So, do you need to be focusing on sustaining things or controlling things, or do you need to make some of the sticking plasters that you put in place quite hastily, do you need to make those things a little bit more permanent and a little bit more robust in what you're doing? In most organisations, you're focusing on the ramp up now, and obviously that needs to run in tandem with government advice as well. So, you might think of a good idea of where you need to be in a number of weeks or months' time that you might want to do, but actually it might not turn out to be feasible or even allowed from a government from an outside perspective.
Bryan, can you just pop up to the slide you're on, because we're seeing the "Where are you today" slide. So have you got the balance one on? Maybe it's lost your slides as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Showing is pause. Bring your shared window to the front. Are you seeing that? What are you seeing now?
Where are you today?
Oh, still? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. We didn't have this problem, did we, Harriet?
There you go, attaboy, there we are. Yeah,
Sorry.
it's back.
Right, technical, nothing like technical things. And so there's this issue of whether some of the things you're doing today are sustainable, scalable, and whether you want them to remain scalable and sustainable. And I think the other point is that as you move through this journey, you need to make sure that you focus the people on the right things, and you almost need to put in place signposts and mileage markers. So, you know, what are you going to be doing in the next period, and how long is that going to last, and what's going to come next? So clear communication as you pursue a number of different strategies and possibly focus people over different time horizons to get to different outcomes. Again, that immediately then goes into, you know, where are you as leaders today? And hand back to Harriet on that note.
So again, 3 kind of quick tips, and so whether this is for yourself or it's the people you're working with who are driving the changes in business model. So confidence, energy levels, default settings. So if you could just go on one slide, Bryan. And I'm lucky that outside the window here, there's a massive great tree. And it really got me thinking that tree has probably seen hurricanes, you know, a couple of pandemics. It's probably about 200 years old. And, you know, one of the things that's kind of enabled it to weather those storms is the roots that it's got. And we often don't see those roots because they're hidden underground. But in the same way, I think we talk about confidence and belief as being almost something that people have or they don't, or that they pick up haphazardly. But there's something I'm seeing at the moment, that people who are consciously building their beliefs, in the same way that when I work with athletes, you know, the sports psychology is a big part of what they do, that they build the belief that they can do it, that, you know, when the pressure's down, when the, you know, millions of people watching them, that they can do it. As a stand-up comic, you know, there's a big piece around getting into the psychology, getting into the belief, the courage to kind of get on stage and just do it. And right now there's a huge amount of courage required to kind of go, look, we don't know. It's not, you know, it's very different from you know, even a normal change program. So one sort of technique to do this is to literally, you know, kind of grow your own roots, and to make a logical list around what are some of the things that I've done that prove that I can step up to the plate here. You know, what project challenges have you handled before? What, you know, if you look back over your career, what are some of the things where you go, well, we did that, we delivered that, we got around that problem. You keep it up to that slide a minute, Ryan. You know, what cock-ups have we learned from? You know, what have you recently done that you've never done before? Whether it's, you know, cutting your other half's hair, or, you know, making bread or something. You know, there could be the macro examples and the micro examples. And someone put in chat recently earlier, how do you persuade clients when they're in that kind of hysterical space, as we all are, around, you know, long-term projects? And again, I'd kind of go, well, where have you done that in the past? What helps to have those longer-term conversations? The whole time value trade-off is always, you know, always a challenge. And physically, to actually almost have them written down. I've got clients who've got them on their phone, so that before they have a phone call, they can look at them. I've got clients at the moment who've got them written on their wall, so they can reference them as a kind of, you know, evidence, rather than kind of woo-woo, yeah, we can do this type fluff. Next thing I want to talk about was energy. Now, I'm in danger of getting all motherly on you. We know this stuff. We know that sleep and nutrition and exercise, okay, are game changers for us having a battery that's recharged. But what fascinates us, I'm not going to go there, we could have spent a whole webinar on that, but what fascinates me is the difference between what we know and what we actually do. And I call this our default settings. So for example, for me, the only way that I'm going to keep fit and healthy is that I have an online class that I have paid for. I know when it is. If I don't turn up, I've lost my money. The instructor is there to kick my butt and to hold me to account. So I wonder right now, what are some of the habits that are useful for you? And again, there was another question in chat about a visualization. There was some really interesting research that said sometimes visualization can lead to complacency, because your brain's going, oh, I'm almost there. And they found that the visualization that worked was when it was twinned with what I call default settings, where actually that kind of vision was translated into action. The more that we can set it as a default setting, so we don't even have to think about it, we just do it, the more that we're likely to make that progress. we do this in the business world and in projects, but how much do we do this to ourselves? So right now, what habits are proving useful? I've got leadership teams who are finding that they are delegating much more than they normally do and having to have quick check-ins. So that's a useful habit they're going to maintain. I've had leadership teams who are much more honest in their conversations and feedback to each other, and that's a useful habit that they're going to maintain. I've had individuals, who are getting into exercise, and although it's because they haven't been commuting, they've realised that that's a habit that they need to bake in. So, 2 quick ways to bake in a habit would be and make it a default setting is either just to set a timer, like I put an alarm clock here. I've got a client who's setting an alarm to go to bed at the moment rather than to wake up, because otherwise they just drift. And another one would be hook it onto an existing thing that you do. If you want to floss your teeth, do it when you clean your teeth. So if there's either an individual or a collective habit that you are finding useful, how can you hook it onto something else to make sure that it sticks? So really simple, but I love the kind of, when is common sense, common practice, as it were, that the whole piece is about visualization and compass bearing for the future, and the piece is about actively cultivating your courage and your confidence rather than just relying on it kind of showing up, and looking after your energy levels, but thinking as well about what are the default settings, that the kind of habits that are going to make you a more effective leader through all of this can be game changers. Bryan.
Thanks, Harriet. So so in this session then, so we've focused just on 2 of these 5 questions that we think are important. We're looking to try and help organisations, what organisations need to do beyond their immediate operational ramp-up activity, and how to get some alignment or realignment of the way in which their operating model, sometimes their business models, but the operating model is set up for the future. And hopefully Harriet's given there some practical strategies that we as individuals and leaders in our organisations can adopt as well. And as I said before, we're going to run at least 1 more session looking at the other 3 questions, although we may end up doing 2, I'm not sure, Harriet, but because there's a lot to cover in any one of these questions, as you've probably picked up on. So I think we've got some time now. We could go to some of these questions then. So hopefully, Barry, Harriet has addressed your question on visualization and complacency by making things more default settings and tying actions to them, things that you actually do. Got another question here from Bruno. So I'll take this one, Harriet, unless you want to take this one about enterprise architecture and business architecture. No? Didn't think so. I think on this one, I would probably label part of what I do as being, enterprise architecture and business architecture, and I think there's perhaps a bit of a misconception, really, or there's a misappropriation in that people do think that it's all about achieving long-term gains, but actually doing things that quickly add value will get the attention of any business and get the buy-in if you can deliver results quickly. So I think actually it's a challenge that we in our business as consultants and architects inside some of the organisations we work with need to step up to. And I think that it's actually a mistake where enterprise architecture practices don't deliver results quickly. Actually, I don't think that's where they should be at all. So the rest of them is all that loss of audio. Where are we? Any other? Yep. Any other questions from anybody? I think we've got a few questions. Harriet, have you got any other questions?
No, I was just going through. Do say if there's some that we haven't answered.
Yes.
I'm just scanning through. There's nothing I can see that's sort of. But please, please, please. I mean, we're just going to share our contact details with you, and you know, please come back in with other questions.
Yeah,
and if you do not know,
Andy's come back with one. Andy Cocker's come back with one. It says, if we don't know, should we experiment? And I think precisely. I think people are already doing this now, but you've got to understand what stakes are at play. Yeah, and you've got to how quickly can you prove or disprove your experiment. But absolutely, I think that there will be a lot of experimentation, particularly if people want to go down the route of new products or services or new ways of engaging with customers. I know Richard Newsom, one of the IT directors at Sainsbury's last week, put up a summary of some of the things that they've done within Sainsbury's over the last couple of months, and there was very definitely a lot of experimentation and learning in that. So I think that's a really good thing.
It's also, I think, on an individual level, I've just brought up that I will take a couple of minutes each day and go, what's working, what isn't, what do I need to change? So I think on a personal level, there's and also on an organisational team level, if you experiment and as long as you have that reflection point to go, did it work or did it not work? Then there can be amazing learning there.
Yeah, I think so. So I mean, hopefully, if you address these questions, you follow this type of framework, then you can avoid being that rabbit trapped in the headlights as this thing progresses and or looking down the train tunnel or whatever it might be. What's this? Another question here. If we don't know, which is your endpoints? We need to be bold and have courage. Yes, you do. You do, absolutely. I think that it's a time for and it's also a time for conversations with that sort of ask people what they need and what assistance that they need, rather than it's very easy for people in our organisation to think they've got the answers for things, but in actual fact, they need to go and see what people need or want at this point in time. And sometimes that might be just to leave them alone for a little while they sort things out. So I wish I had my BBC announcing voice on here, but if you've been affected by any of the themes or topics that we've discussed today, then our contact details. I will share a set of slides. Harriet, I've just noticed that there's a spelling mistake on your URL, and also, you wanted to make an offer to everybody, or you are?
Yeah, so I've got some free resources at the moment, which I put together because I'm rubbish at sewing face masks. So I thought I'd put a resource rucksack of free resources around this stuff, around building courage and confidence and having useful conversations with other people. So I'll give you access to that. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe immediately, but I'll give you access to that.
Okay. All right, good. So if there are any more questions, let us know. If anyone got any scores on the pandemic cliche bingo, let us give us a score. Hopefully that was all right. Thanks, Susie. That's really good. Thank you. Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much. And we will talk to you soon. I'll be communicating when the next one is in due course.